This video is brought to you by Skillshare. Hello noble ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking, and here I am today back again with a new article to learn a thing or two about history. The article of choice for today is from cracked.com. I know, before you say anything, I know that quite a few of you noble ones have told me in the comments,
Metatron, we are concerned about your mental health, and reading all of these articles is gonna make you explode.
So I know you told me stop, please stop reading these articles. You have tried to stop me, but you failed, so here we are. Alright, the title for today is Brace, 5 Scenes from History That Everyone Pictures Incorrectly. So here we are, you see, it's a great chance to learn a thing or two, or 3 or 4. A thing of 5. Let's learn a thing of 5. Whether it takes the form of a somewhat historical film like Braveheart, or an only slightly more fictionalized epic like Lord of the Rings, I suppose they're being funny, we do love watching some old-timey combat. Viking, samurai, Roman centurions. There's just something so much cooler about the way men fought back in old days. So far so good. Or maybe I found a good one, who knows, let's see. And of course we're about to tell you that almost everything you think about those old wars is completely wrong. In reality, point number 5, real Vikings were a bunch of fussy dandies. If I had to guess before reading, I would imagine it has to do with the cleanliness of the Norse. Quick, imagine a Viking, even if you know your history enough to realize they didn't have horns on their helmets, which would be super inconvenient in battle. I agree, it would be super inconvenient in battle, and the Norse didn't use horn helmets in battle, but apparently there has been some new evidence that suggests that perhaps in some ritualistic context helmets with horns existed. Yeah, anyways, they're right. Not in battle. You're still imagining a hardened, filthy brute smelling of stale sweat and English corpses. These were the manliest of men, guys who fed on boiled lamb's head. Okay, that is saying all the myth. Vikings were gritty, grimy, poop and chew. Okay. Actually, oh, I hate the way they write the actually. I know they're doing it on purpose, but it still rubs me wrong. Well, yeah, if by poop and crusted barbarians you mean the most dedicated dandies of their time, who wouldn't? Who wouldn't mean that? With their carefully coiffed hair and trimmed beards, history's Vikings would have scoffed at Chris Hemsworth for looking like a Nordic hobo who spent a night in a dumpster. Yeah, so it has to do with the combing. It turns out the only thing Vikings loved more than a fine day pillaging and slaughtering was the sort of personal grooming most of us modern people wouldn't dream of bothering with. Seriously? Okay, I would imagine the rest of this point is going to be also the fact that they bathed quite a bit, and yeah, that's true. The only thing is that even though they're saying something that is correct, they're of course exaggerating for comedic purposes, but I think one of the problems that I have here is the fact that it's true, the Vikings bathed and they did take care of themselves and groom themselves, but still they are referring to the Vikings as the whole population, whereas the Vikings were just the people that went on a Viking. The population is the Norse. I know that many people use Vikings that way, and I suppose it's okay, but then again, they also sort of push this idea that all the Vikings did was day pillaging and slaughtering, which wasn't. Some Norse were traders. Regardless, this isn't the most terrible point, so I kind of want to move to the next one. Let's go. Number 4, samurai were actually embarrassed of their what? Say what? Oh, come on, this at least just has to be bullshit. A quick Google image search of samurai returns a gazillion results, 99% of which depict the famed warriors with swords in hand. There are drawings about them using swords, there are photos held pajamas, katanas, and weird hairstyles wear their whole thing. Oh my gosh, who's writing this? Samurai damn well lived by the sword, what else did they have? Actually, yes, the samurai did have an ancient tradition centered around the weapon. However, it wasn't the sword. Okay, I think I know where this is going. They realized that the sword wasn't the primary weapon for the samurai, which is something that I think all of us in the community of the sword have been saying. But now they are going all to the other extreme, trying to say they didn't care, they hated it, they were ashamed of it, which they absolutely weren't. But I might be wrong, so let's continue. In fact, ignore every movie and video game about samurai because they only carried swords as awkward, last resort weapons. Oh my gosh, Skimmius, why do I do this to myself? I knew it. Just knew it. We'll check this one out after a brief word from our sponsor. But now I would like to take a moment to mention the sponsor that made this video possible, Skillshare. I'm really excited to be able to present Skillshare to you, number ones, because I've worked with them in the past and I also have my own account, and I think Skillshare is a very valid platform to be able to learn all sorts of skills. And once you become a member, it can help you achieve your personal, professional goals. Now, you may already know Skillshare for their classes in photography, video and film editing, illustration, but did you know that Skillshare also has hundreds of career-focused classes too? You can learn how to launch merchandise on a new platform for passive income. You can learn how to grow your audience with video marketing. And if one of your goals for 2023 is to become your own boss, and let me tell you, definitely one of my goals is to remain my own boss for 2023, then you can learn some tips on how to freelance and how to start a new business. One of my personal goals that I've been working on has been to improve my Photoshop skills so that I can do a better job with both my thumbnails, but also to do animations of like helmets, armor for my videos. And apart from that, I've been following the following courses on filmmaking, photography and finances. Now let me show you specifically 2 more classes that I've been enjoying lately. Productivity and time management is a fantastic class, and one thing I really liked about these classes is the fact that the skills you learn are 100% applicable. The second class I wanted to share with you is diversify your income, earn passive income. And for me, this one has been a big one once again, because it really helped me figure out how to not work harder, but work smarter. And honestly, by creating a secondary passive source of income, you can get back some of that time to spend for your hobbies. If all of this sounds like a lot of fun, absolutely use the link in the description, because the first 1,000 people who click the link in the description will get a 1-month trial of Skillshare for free. So make sure to click that link, and big thanks to Skillshare for sponsoring my video. I think the problem here is that you have someone who clearly doesn't study history, whether it be medieval history, whether it be Japanese feudal history, and they come about a fact, which is the idea that yeah, the katana was a backup sword in the sense that the samurai had other primary weapons, such as spears, naginata, bows, lots of weapons that we can discuss in a little bit, and therefore the sword is not his primary weapon. They figure this out, and then they have to add of their own to make it, wow, that's incredible. And so the fact becomes bullshit. It was a backup weapon. It wasn't an awkward last resort weapon. And they definitely weren't ashamed of their swords. This is ridiculous, oh my god. Kyuba no Michi, the way of the horse and bow, was there centuries before, any semblance of Bushido. That doesn't have anything to do with the sword. It's exactly what it says on the tin. Samurai were all about flinging arrows at peasants from horseback. Well, yes, initially samurai were absolutely mounted archers. They still had swords though. Those were revered over swords to the extent that many Japanese nobles actually downplayed their swordsmanship. I never heard of that. After all, pointing out how great your sword skills were was basically announcing that you're a terrible archer. Well, not necessarily. In fact, samurai, one of the characteristics of Japanese samurai is the fact that they were multitasking all the time. It was basically the fundamental of Samurai 101. It comes with a job. Samurai were good at fighting hand in hand, they were good at using swords, bows, spears, they were great at horseback riding. Samurai were particularly skilled because they were professionals. The introduction of firearms in the 16th century finally killed the samurai supremacy as mounted archers. No, it wasn't gunpowder. Oh my gosh, but this is worse than I thought. I should have listened to your advice. It's not like samurai were mounted archers all the way up to the 16th century. Already well before that, samurai warfare had changed. Even 13th and 14th century warfare, because of all the encounters with Mongolian invasions, was shifting towards a more of an unmasked yari wielding, so basically spearmen, battalions of soldiers. You still had some mounted archery, but it wasn't the primary thing, and it wasn't gunpowder that changed samurai from mounted archers to foot soldiers mostly. As they left the battlefield and settled for a new life as bureaucrats and officials, they're formally relieved. Wait, I hope you don't mean that they did that in the 16th century, because that's the Sengoku Jidai. And that's anything but leaving the battlefield and settling down. Their formerly relieved swords started taking on actual importance as elaborate status symbols. Okay, so they're getting confused between the Sengoku Jidai and the Edo period, which is what happens later. But I suppose this is a little slip, so I won't dwell on it too much. And because bows weren't really an option anymore, the sword became the go-to weapon of the honorable, sword-wielding, Bushido-following, and completely fictional samurai they retroactively invented to feel better about their Kwami desk jobs. This is complete fiction. Bows were still in use well within the age of gunpowder. It's not like, oh, now we have gunmen, so let's remove all of the archers. No, it was for every gunman you need to have a certain number of archer units. Archers weren't completely removed from the armies when gunpowder arrived. It's just that this new type of unit, which was the gunner, became a primary unit. Absolutely, but it was still supported by archers. Oh good, the samurai party's over. What have we got now? Gladiators. Gladiators were basically fat pro wrestlers. Who writes these? Turn on Spartacus' Gods of the Arena or watch Gladiators and it's easy to get the impression that ancient gladiators were all either lethal bodybuilders or at the very least kinda doughy yet vicious Russell Crowe type. I can't even read. Of course they were in decent shape. Fighting to the death was their sole job description. Yeah, I wouldn't say bodybuilders, but of course they would have been in shape, yes.
Actually...
Well, that's what we used to think anyway. Archaeologists recently dug up a whole pile of gladiator remains and it seems that famed warriors of the arena would need to do some serious cardio if they ever wanted to grace the cover of Men's Health magazine. Yes, we are saying it looks like gladiators were total fatties. Oh my gosh. Can you imagine? Like, first of all, I'd like to seriously have a look at this supposed digging because of course there is absolutely no link to whatever archaeological finding that they are talking about. Not to mention I'd like to see how they figured out how the exact percentage of body fat. But regardless, even if it were true that they dug up one grave where a few gladiators were, that doesn't mean that every single gladiator is going to be a mirror image of what you have found in this dig. Of course gladiators would have been fit. They were professional fighters. Goodness gracious. I need pasta tonight. What we tend to forget about gladiatorial fighting is that it was ultimately show business. The Colosseum arena was big-time theatre more than anything else. They did have theatre, by the way. And being able to deliver a good show far outweighed sculpted abs. Well, since we're talking about combat, being able to deliver a good show meant that these people needed to be proficient. Can you imagine if all MMA fighters and boxers were completely out of shape? Yeah, you do get the occasional one, but let's say they were all completely out of shape. What kind of a spectacle is that? The Roman crowds wanted to see blood and displays of great fighting skills. Well, yeah, displays of great fighting skills, absolutely. You need to be trained to have great fighting skills. You can't be whatever the heck you said that I'm not going to repeat so I don't get demonetized. Also, again, this idea that, oh, Roman crowds wanted blood. No, not any more than we do when we watch MMA. And what really got the crowds going, let's see, was when gladiators sustained bloody, spurty wounds, yet continued to fight. They read like a couple of things, they make their mind a completely wrong way because they have no basis, and then they add of their own. Gladiator schools were well aware of this, which is why they deliberately fattened up their fighters so they could take and dish out showy yet not fatal flesh wounds. Complete fabrication. This is more fantasy than the Lord of the Rings. If the crowd was satisfied and felt they had seen a worthy performance, meaning some bloodshed and gutsy swordplay, the gladiators ran a better chance of becoming super popular instead of dying. In fact, unless you were a prisoner being fed to the lions or something, the chance of dying in the arena was only about 10%. Okay, so 10% again it's a clickable link. I'm gonna click it. Okay, so the link takes me to a book it's called The Life of the Gladiator. Great, and let's see what it reads. It says, this later evidence indicates that half of all matches ended in the death of one of the gladiators. Those entering the arena in this later period had 1 in 4 likelihood of death. Well, I'll have to look into this book and probably study it a bit more, but I'd like to say that whether this book was right or wrong, which should be double checked, 1 in 4 is not 10%. This is maths we're talking about. 1 in 4 is 25%. Basically, this means that fights between professional gladiators were a slightly more extreme version of modern pro wrestling. Scripted fights, choreographed moves, and the occasional deliberate blading to bring on the blood. Absolutely not. They were actual fights. Yes, it would have been more of a spectacle, but nowhere is there any evidence, whether it be literary, archaeological, sculpture, the material evidence, nothing indicates that they were entirely choreographed. What's the next one? Number 2. How many do we have left? Number 2, cavalry charges were surprisingly ineffective. We're in the Middle Ages now. Get ready. In medieval times, the cavalry was the equivalent of an army of Navy SEALs. This is the myth part. It's actually true, but whatever. Each driving a tank that is somehow also a Navy SEAL. Devastating battles between two armies were fine and all, but everyone knew shit didn't truly get real until cavalry came in. That's why the very word has come to mean an invincible force that drives the enemy away, and countless films and TV shows still depict horsemen as a game changer, it absolutely was, that can plow through hapless foot soldiers like lines of bowling pins. It's a little exaggerated, but yeah, pretty much. Hell, all the fancy knights and commanders rode on horseback. Surely they wouldn't have done that if the massive hooved hell beasts they are riding would somehow be a disadvantage. Precisely.
Actually,
A warrior who fought on horseback was truly screwed if the enemy knew what they were doing. In fact, English knights were well aware, I can't pronounce this, well aware. Putting this Italian's pronunciation to the limit. Were well aware of this and regularly dismounted for battle. The fact that the English dismounted for battle, it was an exception, it was quite rare, and it was a specific tactical choice. It has nothing to do with the idea that being on a horse is somehow a disadvantage. Cavalry is actually less of a battering ram and more like a sniping tool. Apart from intimidation tactics and chasing down fleeing enemies, which, yeah, of course, these are called light cavalry operations, but you also have heavy cavalry, shock cavalry. Fleeing enemies, they were best used to exploit the enemy's weaknesses, performing quick run-in, stab, run-back, sniggering, attacks on various gaps in formations and other tactical openings. Well, yeah, of course, I mean, it was used tactical, and sometimes when it wasn't used correctly, even a cavalry charge could be ineffective, absolutely. But that doesn't mean that it was only used to do a little snippet, occasionally run after some people that are fleeing enemies. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But if some confident banner commander decided to try the old cavalry charge against an enemy formation, he was screwed. Let's see why he was screwed. The second the group of war destriers bore into the enemy, they'd A. lose all momentum. Yes, onto them. Physics tells us what happens when a body that is running at a certain speed hits another body and comes to an halt. It would be like saying, oh, don't worry about getting run over by a car. It's a car's problem, not yours, because they're gonna lose all their momentum. And B, find themselves completely surrounded by a bunch of pissed off enemies with pikes. You know, I know this is not possible, but I'd like to challenge the writer of this article and say, mate, you stand still in the middle of a field. I'm gonna get on top of a horse in full plate armor, little barding for good measure, and I'm gonna come at you. See which one is screwed. Since I'm gonna lose all of my momentum, you don't even need to try and defend yourself, do you? As long as the enemy foot soldiers held together, which they often did because tactics, shockingly, were a thing even back then, frigging presentism, arrogant, modern, thinking everyone is below him, people in the past, so stupid. No cavalry charge was going to end with a trip to trample town. Instead, a mounted warrior would usually have to pull up before the enemy formation and pathetically flail at the enemy soldiers with his, in what world is this guy living in? Medieval cavalry and heavy charges were the dominant way of war for centuries in medieval Europe. Plus the fact that he says, as long as the enemy foot soldiers held together, which is, a piece of cake, do it. Do it. Stand with your group of your mates, all the hundreds of writers that this website has, do a little chain email, you can call it chain mail, and then you can all, 30, 40 of you can just stand there, and then we're going to have 50 knights in full plate armor charging at you. Piece of cake, right? If people in the past could do it, even if they were so stupid, of course you're going to pull it off. You just need to stand there, and then boom, they're just going to do it. No, do it and film it and send it to me. Won't be able to post it though. Too gory. As many a knight found out the hard way, the odds in such a situation are kind of stacked for the guys with lots of spears and their feet firmly on the ground. Number 1, back in ancient Rome it seems, Roman armies didn't look like the movie Gladiator. Standing ovation, please. Although we might be hazy about the exact details of their costumes, we all have a pretty good idea of what Roman soldiers looked like. I highly doubt you do. Rome was, after all, an advanced civilization with a professional army marching in disciplined ranks and against hordes of filthy, disorganized armies. That's how they built their empire, right? Their super cool uniforms, again with uniforms. They didn't have uniforms. Is a modern thing, merely reflected their status as a wealthy superpower.
Actually...
If you had a time machine and were dumb enough to use it to visit a Roman battlefield, well, I'm not sure it would be a dumb thing to do. I mean, if I had a time machine and I knew that I could come back, I would absolutely visit a Roman battlefield, gather a couple of helmets and lorica segmentata armors in perfect conditions, then bring them back to the future, sell them to a museum, and become rich. You'd find that only a fraction of the Roman army would remotely resemble what you would probably think of as Roman. No. All of those Roman soldiers would look exactly like the majority of people watching this would expect them to look. To you, however, that's because Imperial Rome's army was basically the ancient world's version of the French Foreign Legion, only they didn't bother with matching uniforms. I think what he's trying to say, just so I don't submit you to more of this, I think what he's trying to say is that not all Roman legionaries would have been a Control-C, Control-V, in the sense that armor would vary. This would be the real thing to say, absolutely. You could have someone with mail, someone with scale, a lot of people with segmented armor after a certain period of time, but then yes, the helmets wouldn't all look the same. You could have some bronze or maybe some different types of Gallic. That's true, absolutely, but I think the problem is that he's expecting them all to have a uniform, and they don't. No one ever expected the Romans to be wearing a uniform. Uniforms weren't a thing, and they were wearing armor. It's a different type of situation. Well, anyways, I think that this is enough for today. We have read absolutely quite a few things, but interestingly enough, here is something we can see. Jay, so that the person who's writing this article, is working on a book about sex, history, and money. You can message her, you can keep it. You can absolutely keep it, mate. But yeah, let me know, number ones, which one of these was your favorite. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching, and remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye. Also, don't forget to click the link in the description to take advantage of the very kind offer by Skillshare.